Watson nowhere to go. Steps up. He's going to try to keep it. Inside the 5. Lowers the shoulder. And he takes it in. What a run by Deshaun Watson. Watson buys some time. Throws to the end zone and it's caught. Kiki QT. And is sacked. Hit hard by Justin Reed. And his pass is batted down. J.J. Watt. That's the 4th time today.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. And we have a win to talk about this week, a 27-20 victory against the Patriots as the roof was open in NRG Stadium, and was what was probably the most complete performance on both sides of the ball. And Houston moved to 3-7. Joining me this week to talk this one over, and also a trip to Detroit for the Turkey Day kickoff of the triple header, is Mike Meltser. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, thanks. Good. It's all right after a win. It feels
always
like
better after a win.
And a win not against the Jaguars.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and even though it's not the same Patriots team, I think there's something to the idea that it's still the uniforms, it's still Belichick, and even though they're not that good this season, there's no Tom Brady, it's still nice, especially after what we've gone through the last 10 years of beating the Patriots and beating Belichick.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly good to just kind of feel like we've beaten a bona fide NFL team this year, which I don't think the Jags necessarily are in their attempts to tank or their perceived attempts to tank. Obviously, they're not doing that by the rule book, But before the game, Mike, and I think we've got to win this week, so we'll probably actually have more to talk about in a game than we have in previous. But this continually seems to be a revolving door of information pre-game, which is an odd time to release stories. But ESPN continue to peddle these stories every week now, and obviously the protagonist most of the time is Jack Easterby. Now, like there is obviously a clear vitriol from many of the fan base and onlookers for his position.
Yes.
For my point of view, him still being there absolves of the blame that he should take his fair share in, and he seems to have disappeared. Now, most of us only see the bubbles at the surface. What do you think's bubbling below the surface to make this sort of a regular occurrence every week now?
Well, it is a little weird that Cal McNair has, on numerous occasions, had to clarify that, hey, Jack Easterby's not going to be the GM. That's a little weird to me in that, I mean, it's good because I don't think anybody wants him to be the GM, but it's a little odd that the owners had to make that clarification numerous times about one of the most important people in football operations in his building. I just think that's it's telling that they've had to clarify it now numerous times. I know that there's been people floating out a theory that maybe what makes the most sense is that the Texans have a pretty good idea of where they're going with their next general manager. And if that guy's on board with Jack Easterby remaining in the organization, then that's the kind of situation that would make sense to where you could say, hey, Jack's not going to be the GM. He's going to be in the organization, and we're hiring a GM. If you have a pretty good idea of where you want to go with the GM, then you can say all of those things and it be true.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think obviously the message has obviously got through to them now, and I posted an open letter to Cal last week, and I emailed it to him, and a day later he came out with not that I'm saying he read it, I'm not that deluded, but I think that he...
I think you made it the cause. I think you're the guy. Cal Redding was like, listen, I got people in England who want to figure out what's going on. I need to clarify this. Let me call up John McClain and Adam Schefter.
But I just thought it was but you said the biggest thing I took from it was the timing of it, that he had a direct quote to one of these insiders in inverted commas, and that's not typical behaviour. And then the day prior, when Jamie Roots is pushing his crass book that he's brought out about monetizing fans, despite a lacking on-field product, he also went out his way to mention it as well when he was asked by a season ticket holder about his role. So I think the message has obviously hit them, and I think it must have hit Easterby as well because he's just disappeared, from the public eye at this point.
Yep. Yeah, it's very strange. That's the best way I can describe it. I'm trying to think what else to add. It's just such a strange situation. I think maybe what led to Cal clarifying was the fact that a few days earlier there was the report by Ian Rappaport that, hey, maybe Romeo Crennel is going to stay on in 2021 as the head coach, which I do not think is a possibility whatsoever. And a lot of people took that report and said, well, this is a way for Jack Easterby to remain the GM, which he is on an interim basis. So I think maybe those reports led the organization to feel like, hey, we need to clarify this as we move forward in this season.
Yeah, because that report from Ian Rappaport, and I talked about that with Brandon Scott last week, that it just seemed out of kilter and it just seemed a strange report. So I think that obviously came from outside. Now you can tell that by this week, reading between the lines. This is obviously their attempt to put out their side of the story, because I think that when fans are turning up to games with signs to say fire a guy who's not anything near the playing staff or the coaching staff, I think that just shows you the level of credence that this guy holds within the fan base. But it just seems as you said, I just think it's a really strange position to be in, that everybody connected to the team and wants this team to do well, and as a vested interest team wants this guy gone, but yet they're coming out saying, well, actually, we see him playing a role. But I think what Cal seems to do, I think his communication is terrible at times, because the fact that there was a conflicting report with John McLaren and then Adam Schefter, within minutes of one another, I think that's where he lets himself down at times, because he's, there was one, the article in the Chronicle came out and said that'll be up to the general manager to decide his fate, which we all hope is true, because that's the most logical, common sense kind of approach, because he should be, running the show at that point, whoever that might be. And then the second one, and then there's other reports saying that he's involved in it. So I think there's not many teams that could achieve this sort of set of confusion with somebody so, in theory, vital to its operation.
Yeah, and this is what happens when you don't fully clean house, when you fire Bill O'Brien, but you don't fire Jack Easterby. I think there's been... I understand that when I talk to people, they say, well, Cal's not comfortable talking to the media, certainly not in an open microphone kind of situation. And my response is that, listen, if you're a billionaire and you're running a company like the Texans, which it's not publicly traded, but it's like a community, it's a big community thing in a big city. Like, you have to be able to talk to the media. Like that to me is just, that's the way it is. So, and Cal's been training for this for a long time, and I'm sure they do trainings on talking to reporters and doing things like that. And nobody's really fully explained to the fan base or the media what the exact value of Jack Easterby is. Like, just on a fundamental level, why is Jack Easterby employed? Because with other guys, you can say, well, they're employed for this reason or for that reason. And even if you don't like them being there, at least you can find a way to explain it in a way that makes sense. With Easterby, nobody sat down and said, okay, this is why the Texans felt the need to hire him to begin with from New England, and this is why he's in his role now, and this is why he's going to remain in the future. Like, that has not really been fully explained to the fan base. I mean, ultimately, I don't like the situation. And I've said this on the podcast I do with Landry Locker and Cody Stutz, which comes out usually every Monday night and Tuesday morning. I do not like the situation. If it were me running the show, Jack Easterby would not be part of my organization. But I guess I'm in a spot where, like, beggars can't be choosers. And ultimately, the Texans will hire a GM and they will hire a head coach. And I think 2 months from now, people will be much more optimistic, because I think those guys, like, I think from a coaching standpoint, there are a lot of good candidates out there. I think they'll end up with one of them. And then from a GM standpoint, as long as they hire a GM who is a football guy, which is not hard to do, then they will automatically be in a much better situation than they have been from June 2019 to basically now.
Yeah, and I think the fact that, it's the position he's in and the level of complete rejection that anybody has, the fact that his name comes up, I think just shows you how badly it's been run. That you're saying exactly. You need to just, we talked about this last week, draining the swamp, starting again, admitting you were wrong in every facet of the last 18 months. We gave power to the wrong people. And that was what I put in the letter to Cal. I said, you've got two fundamental problems at the minute. You've had an 18-month spell where you've given people the autonomy to make decisions they were not qualified for or nor had the experience for. And then secondly, you've got a growing disconnect with the fan base, because I think, you can see that even the limited amount of tickets that you can sell to enter NRG Stadium on a Sunday, they're not even selling those. So I think that, and he'll see that, and that, that I doubt that'll be, Jamie Roots talked about that as well. But I think they need to, I think that when you've got a crisis, whether it's any sort of company, and this is a multi-billion-dollar business we're talking about here, you need to publicly apologize, and I don't think they've done that yet. And there needs to be the tipping point. But the tipping point with this is and it's similar to kind of politics in the sense you live and die in the court of public opinion, that if you win football games and this team starts the season 5-0 next year, I don't think anybody will really care. But as such is the business.
Yeah, definitely. And it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens. I do think the good thing is that there are a lot of good head coaching candidates out there. And from a GM standpoint, you can't really say this enough. The Texans made Bill O'Brien the GM, which made no sense. He was not qualified for the job. Their current interim GM, Jack Easterby, is not qualified for the job. So when I look over the names, even the guys who, Jack Easterby's agency, they represent a lot of head coaches, assistant coaches, personnel people. I look at their backgrounds and I'm like, that guy sounds good. That guy sounds good. This guy sounds good, because they're all football people. And they actually, if they became the GM, at least they would have some real qualifications. I know it's hard to win a Super Bowl. I think we all understand that. What's not hard is to run a normal franchise. And I just am very eager for the day in which the Texans have what every other NFL team has, which is a GM and a head coach. They are two different people. They are brought in, and they are in tandem running the operation. I think even just that basic level of structure will help this team immensely moving forward.
I mean, yeah, because you could argue, bar, or perhaps even never has this franchise had that, I think, because if you think, Kubiak was not, Kubiak came in before Rick Smith. I know they were close, but then it was arguable that they got the roster to a position that it was competitive enough, but it seemed to all fall away. And I think definitely since the end of the Kubiak era, we've never had that. So you're coming up for 7-8 years of that. So it feels like there's just organic growth to be had even by this roster, and in small sections next year, even if you don't improve it materially within talent, a decent coaching staff and some decent football people around that might give it a bit of a forward direction once more.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I fully agree with the idea that they haven't had that. I mean, they haven't had it with two new people doing those jobs since 2006. They have had, a new coach in O'Brien in 2014. They had a new GM in 2018 in Brian Gain, but they have not had what at least they say they're going to do, and what I think will happen, which is a fresh start with a GM and a head coach.
Yeah, and as Jamie Root said, I think hope will spring eternal. So it needs to, even if it just springs mildly, I think that'll put us in a position certainly better than we are now. Talk about the game then. I think we'll probably, the Easterby sort of off-field stuff's probably been done to death by everybody, but I think ultimately it just hangs over everything. But Sunday, for the first time, was a performance that I think that on both sides of the ball was positive for the large part. And I think talking about the press conference where Anthony Weither got really fired up during the week, and it almost felt like that frustration and that anger kind of showed in some of the defense aggression and some of the play calling as well.
I thought this was their best performance of the season, both ends of the football. Offensively, they were awesome in the first half, scored 21 points, had to settle for a couple of field goals in the second half. But, I don't know what was going on with New England's game plan. I thought they threw the ball way too much. I don't know why they seemed to give up on the running game after the first drive, which was so successful. But Deshaun was on point, so that's obvious. And then the Texans defensively, when the Patriots did run, they were able to make some key stops. Bradley Roby on that toss against Burkhead. Bradley Roby with an excellent play. Unfortunately, it hurts Burkhead, but it was a great football play. And then they started to, in the fourth quarter, really dial up the pressure. The double safety blitzes, which we saw from Anthony Weaver a couple times, seemed to really affect Cam. And honestly, this was in his third season. I don't think Justin Reid has played a better game than he played on Sunday. And coming off of a bad performance against Cleveland, where he's taking shots at the media on Twitter, which was nonsense. But I thought, to his credit, and he tweeted about it after the game, like he took that as motivation. And I just thought it was a very controlled aggression. 9 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, a sack, 2 quarterback hits. Justin Reid played his best game on Sunday in his career, and I felt was the Texans' second best player. So kudos to him. He was excellent.
Yeah, and I think with Reid, it's, him and Zach Cunningham were expected to be, pillars of this defense, and neither, I don't think, have played anywhere near the levels of where they would want
Yeah, I'm
them
with you.
And I think Cunningham seems to have come better after the bye. A lot of high angles on his tackles, and that was inherent in his game. But he seemed like the change of role, I think, was a challenge for him. I think in the sense of not having BMAC there, because he basically lived off BMAC scraps and allowed him to consume blockers, and he would just go chase down and make plays. So I think he had some adjusting to do, and I think with Justin Reid as well, it's probably the worst secondary he's played with probably at any stage of his career, from high school, right to his final game in Stanford. So I feel for the guy in a sense that he's probably trying to do too much. But I think, when it looked like he'd probably had his worst game, then he goes out the next week and has a good game. And Anthony Weaver talked about that. He said he'll come good. It just takes a bit of time, and he was right. I think it was a good performance, and I think that the Reid tackles, behind the line of scrimmage, and particularly that Bradley Roby play that you referenced there, Mike. I couldn't remember the last time I've seen 2 defensive backs flying in the backfield to make a stop.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like any stop they make is just you're like, where did that come from? I mean, I think even early in this game. Even early in this football game, the Patriots, they go down the field and they score 10 plays, 84 yards, and you're like, yep, this is what we're going to be in for all day. They're just going to run the ball and have screens to James White and this and that. And Houston gets the ball, goes down the field and scores, and then the Texans force a 5-and-out against the Patriots, and it was like, that was actually a pretty nice defensive possession, which we've rarely said so far this season. And that kind of continued throughout different parts of the game. And I think with Reid, I'm not some like defensive X's and O's expert, but I just think when he's playing, when he's moving forward, I think he's a little better than when he's, retreating backwards. I think he's one of those defensive players. And so you want to, in the right situations, keep him along the line of scrimmage, have him blitz against the run, have him blitz the quarterback, and the 3.5 tackles for loss, the sack, the quarterback hits. I think those kind of speak for themselves.
I thought that it was almost mildly frustrating at times because, we're watching the game and, the guys were sitting there going, where's this been all year? And I think that was most people's reaction. I thought the defensive play calling looked similar to some of the stuff that Weaver was calling earlier in the year. And then when O'Brien got fired, it felt like, Cronell maybe had a bit more influence there. It was a bit more,
I agree.
His kind of brand, and he'd obviously, told him a couple of things he wanted to see change. And it felt like, because I think that was the big thing, wasn't it? Anthony Weaver was talked up in the media over the summer that he would be an aggressive play caller. And, it felt like, we've gone away from that for the best part of 6 weeks.
I think one of the things that hurts you as a defensive coordinator is that when you're constantly trailing in game, right? I mean, if you can't stop the run and you're behind in almost every game that you play, then there's kind of a limit to how aggressive you're able to play, right? I mean, like when you're playing, especially early in the season, when you're playing the Chiefs, the Ravens, Minnesota, Tennessee for a while, certainly the Packer game. I mean, if you're calling plays defensively and you're behind on the scoreboard and you can't stop the run, there's going to be a limit to what you can do. And so I think we've seen some flashes here and there, even against maybe Cleveland last week where they played a decent defensive game. That was obviously high wins, low point total sort of game. But in a game like this, when the Texans are playing from ahead for most of it, and you're facing kind of a shaky quarterback in Cam Newton, it does allow Anthony Weaver the freedom to do some things that he may have wanted to do in other games, but didn't really have the opportunity based on where the game was to actually do it.
Yeah, I think I mean, it opens up the play sheet, right? If you've got a lead, doesn't it? Or they're going to drop back and pass. But I think there was probably on both sides of the ball, but they gave us a bit of a free pass in the sense that if they just kept running every play like they did on that first drive, it felt like, here we go. You get a 3 and out or a stall drive when he tries to force that one to Duke Johnson. They go right up the other end and score. But it did seem like there was a lot of creativity there, because even on the play just before they scored that opening touchdown, you had JJ dropping into coverage.
I don't think we've seen that in a long time.
No.
Like, I can't remember the last time I saw that. I've seen that, period.
Well, I was thinking, we were saying that watching the game, what was a rarer occurrence, the roof opening or JJ into coverage? Because I don't think I've seen that. I think that the roof being open, actually, and I saw a couple of people pick up on this, and it was a trick play, and there was I think it was it Bird was the receiver, and I think it was maybe Myers was the deep. They're both open, and it looked like, I mean, we're speculating, of course, but it looked like Cam's vision could have been impaired by the bright sunlight coming in that end of that end zone, because the deep receiver was gone. And at that point, if they had scored a 6 there, then I think the game complexion might have changed.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's always been my thing with the roof open. I know that this is like a big topic that people love to make fun of them for closing the roof all the time. That actually does not really bother me much, because just the way the stadium is built and with the roof and kind of the square design of it, that when you're playing and, if it's overcast, it doesn't matter, but it's Houston, so usually there's going to be the sun, and the sun's going to hit the field at weird angles. And I remember being in the stadium for a couple of the games where the roof was open, and I personally, even watching the game with my binoculars from high above, I didn't really love how it looked with the shadows, and I thought, well, that's got to affect the players a little bit. And yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if on that trick play, Cam didn't see the deep receiver because of the shadows on the field.
And I mean, it is. I think that the fact that it's a topic, I think probably says something about the level of play that we've had on the field, rather than if that is actually a topic for people to talk about. But you did notice it in the first half, and I thought the broadcast on CBS struggled with it as well, because the camera couldn't focus if the ball moved from in the sun to out the sun.
Yeah, I think on the first drive of the game, Deshaun threw it like sort of in the middle of the field, like probably 20 yards, and the camera guy completely got faked out. They were like on the high side of the field. You couldn't see what the hell was going on.
Yeah, and that was another one. I think I counted 3 plays. I think now I won't criticize Deshaun, because I think he had the best first half, certainly, that he's had for a long time. There was 3. I watched the all-22 back there. There was 3 plays where Fuller was gone deep and he didn't find him. That one was that one where even the cameraman thought it was going on.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of others where he could have. One of the drive we scored, one of the field goal drives in the second half. That Fuller was gone. It was a failed sort of RPO play, which doesn't seem to be working for him. We'll come on to the run game. But talking about Deshaun's performance, in the first half, that was some of the best football he's played in a long time. I couldn't remember the last time he's played a complete half of football, to that level. I think he was 78% completion rate at halftime.
Yeah, he was brilliant. I mean, you think about the first touchdown drive, I should say, and when he's hitting that play to Cooks, which I think was a third down play. It was a 2nd and 6. Hit him for 44 yards, just put it right in the right spot. he's able to hit Jordan Akins for 22 yards on a ball that's just pinpoint place right at the shoulder. And then even the Cobb touchdown pass where Cobb got hurt in that play, but that was not a big window sort of deal. I've been listening to some of the Boston radio after the game because I'm always just kind of curious to see what those guys are saying. And they were annoyed at the game plan the Pats had defensively because they were like, they basically kind of sat back and had the kind of game plan that you would have if you were facing a bad quarterback, and you're like, well, let's just like hopefully the bad version of this quarterback shows up and he just can't make the throws, because we're going to sit back here, we're going to rush 3 guys 13 times, rush 4 guys most of the time, and just kind of sit back here and see what he does. And Deshaun Watson just picked them apart basically the entire game. So that was their frustration. I mean, he was without question the best player on the field.
I think that similar to their approach on offense when they kept throwing it, and forgot to mention, I think Philip Gaines is going for a record this year because he's been in the defense for only 4 snaps, and on those 4 snaps he's given up a touchdown every single one of those snaps. So
yeah, I saw that earlier. I want to go back because I feel like I've seen Philip Gaines on more than just 4 snaps. I feel like I've seen 29 way too often on my television screen, but I did see that earlier.
Yeah, I saw that as well. It felt a bit, perhaps a bit unfair. I don't know if he's been burnt on every snap. Now, he has come in for a single snap and then been taken right off because he's given up a touchdown immediately.
Yes. And what's weird is that he actually had decent coverage on that touchdown to Bird. It was just that he just didn't. I know it's not as easy to play the ball as fans would have you believe, but at least lift your arms up and just make it a little bit more challenging for Bird at the goal line.
Yeah, create a bit of a something to try and get something on the ball, I think. But I think Lonnie Johnson, on that one, I saw Cornell talk about it in it. He, Lonnie goes after the dig, and actually Jacoby Myers talked about that, saying that the Texans had a play call that the safety was going to drive on every time he had an in-cut route. So I think Lonnie was getting a bit hungry because I think he's probably wanted an interception or something like that to try and announce himself at safety, which he's not really. Which he had a better game, I think, Lonnie Johnson, but most of it came through blitzing rather than actually any coverage ability. Yeah,
I think Lonnie is going to be a long-term project, and he had 2 quarterback hits. He's definitely a guy who I think you want to use his physical traits in a blitzing situation, which Anthony Weaver did a couple times. I remember Matt Weston wrote at one point before his rookie season last year in 2019 that he thought that Lonnie was a 3-year project. Well, we're only in the middle of year 2. And I know that kind of time frame doesn't really fit in with the modern NFL where people are so quick to move on. And I don't know what Lonnie is going to become. And I'm not so sure that that was a smart draft pick given where they were organizationally in 2019. But I do think if he is going to be a productive player, that is going to be a 3-year project. And sometimes a project works and sometimes it doesn't. And so that's kind of where I am at with Lonnie.
I keep having flashbacks. I don't know if you remember the brief snaps that another Lonnie had. Lonnie Ballantine, was it? When they kept around for many years.
Very brief.
Yeah.
Brief.
And
yeah.
And I remember actually in a game against Jacksonville where he got another injury and he left the field and all the players were down on one knee around him.
Yeah.
And he was one of those guys that they kept around, big safety. They almost look identical when you see the two.
They really do.
Starting to think it might be the same guy. He's just come back. But I think he was a project. It never panned out. His was for injuries, I think, because he was Mr. Irrelevant, wasn't he? He was 256 pick.
Yeah, he was.
That draft. So it feels like when you have to. But I think the big difference with Lonnie is he was a second rounder.
Yep.
And it just feels like something needs to flourish a bit more, because if you think like Jonathan Grenard, 3rd round pick, gets a sack, has flashed, and you want to see flashes, but yet the only flashes I've seen at Lonnie Johnson is actually giving up touchdowns rather than actually, I'm yet to see him save one, put it that way.
Yeah, no, and he's a guy, and Cody and I have disagreed about this. I look at Lonnie, and I know there's obviously room for bigger cornerbacks in the NFL, but I look at him and I'm just like, I don't know if he has the the quickness, the quick twitch muscles and fibers to be able to hold up as an outside corner. And so when I looked at him even a year ago, I was thinking, you move this guy to safety, you take the coverage skills that he had as a cornerback and you combine it with his raw physical ability, and I think you could have something at safety. Now, obviously, you have to know what you're doing at safety. You have to know the schemes, who you're covering. I think one of the touchdowns against Pittsburgh looked like it was completely on Lonnie. It was a complete coverage bust. I think it was on him. I could be wrong about that. And I need to look at what the snap count was on Sunday, because it's not like he's out there, 80% of the time. But I think this team hung on to too many guys way too long. And I think the key thing on Sunday shows you that, and getting rid of DeAndre Carter finally, they need to use these games. I know they want to win. I get that. But they really need to use these games at least partially / substantially to find out what they have in some of these guys. And Lonnie Johnson is one of the prime examples of that kind of player who might be part of the future, may not be part of the future. And they need to start figuring that out by watching him hopefully develop on the field with actual reps.
Yeah, I saw Justin Reed calling them, was it the Evil Twins or something like that? I thought it was a bit dangerous territory when you're sitting with 7 losses and you're coming up for nicknames when your defense has been this bad. But I don't know. That's maybe that's the kind of attitude you have to have as a mental attitude as a secondary player to brush off all the mental aspect of it, which I think is a difficult position to play. And I don't expect Lonnie to be a star, but you'd like to see something more than we have done at this stage. But it looks like there is a basis there for your 2 safeties next year, and if we can see similar levels of play for the rest of the season, it'll make you feel a bit better about that side of the ball. And obviously the rest of the secondary, bar Bradley, Roby, will be the first players to be cut, you got to think. As you saw on that long touchdown, and our wide receiver, who I wasn't even that familiar with, led the New England 300 odd yards and a passing attack, but at times it looked very easy.
So you think Roby will be cut next season?
No, I'm saying everybody bar Roby will be cut.
Sorry, yeah. I agree. Yeah. I think Roby's one of the few keepers in the secondary, and they're going to need what the Texans will need between the lack of cap space and the lack of draft capital they have is they desperately need to find guys who are relatively cheap, who are at least around average as starters. And I know in an ideal world you want way above average, but again, the whole beggars can't be choosers. Like, I think next year is going to be a transition season. I think they'll win many more games. I think they'll hopefully contend for a playoff spot next season, just because I don't expect them to have the worst run defense in the league, the worst rushing game in the NFL. So I think they'll be better, but it's critical even for that kind of season to find guys who are cheap investments who are playing at an acceptable level. Like, I keep talking about this with my friends, but it's like last year they had Jaleel Adai, who they barely paid anything, and was a pretty good contributor. Now they're paying way too much for Eric Murray for God knows what reason.
Yeah, I think I counted twice at least in this game, and he does it every week in zone coverage. He gets the angle wrong. The safety's deep. He's the slot corner. He doesn't cut off the front side enough, and there's an easy reception on the boundary. He does it every week, and that contract was going to be bad. I mean, it's been beaten to death, that one. That contract was going to be bad. It's as bad as everybody thought it would be.
Yep.
But you've got to think he's probably not going to have much choice but to see if he can give you something as maybe your 3rd or 4th safety, or the most expensive 3rd or 4th safety in the league. But an example of a guy like that, Mike, I think is somebody like Pharaoh Brown, who came in. He had that great run where he stiff-armed the DB in the face. He's a good blocker. And those are the kind of guys you want to have. He's never going to be your first tight end, but he has made the coaches distribute the snaps differently than he did before he was in the building. I think that probably shows that a guy on a veteran minimum, was a big star at Oregon, almost lost his leg in a terrible injury, is come in and actually looks like a decent pickup. So those kind of guys are the ones that I think the Texans are going to have to find at least 5 or 6 of to fill out this roster for next year.
Yeah, I think that's a good number. Do you think that Kahali Waring is going to play? Because they activated him, but between Akins, who had his career best game on Sunday, Fells, who's fine, And then Pharaoh Brown, who, as you mentioned, has done some things blocking, as a good physical presence. I don't know that we're going to see Kahali out there all that quickly here.
If it were no, do I think no? If it were me, I would just take all of Fell's snaps and give them to Waring for the rest of the year, because I think he only played 30-40%. He's not going to give you anything. We know what he is at this stage. He's a good player in a rotation. Fails or flatters to deceive to be a blocker. I don't think he's a blocker that everybody hoped he would be, despite his frame and arm length that he should be. But I think Pharaoh Brown's coming and taking that as the primary blocker on the edge, in line with the formation. So I think will Waring come? I hope so, because you talk about the Lonnie Johnson pick in the exact same draft, and I know the Patriots running back was taking the pick later, so it was kind of it was poignant for this weekend, as he's been removed from IR, but. He's a guy that you didn't need to take at that position. Now, I think they would have taken Jalen Ferguson from, I think it's Louisiana Tech, and I think he went to the Ravens a couple of picks below, because I know they were big on him. So I think they were the one he wanted, and then I think Gaines the best player available. So it was one of those guys that fell in their lap more than I think they desperately wanted. But
I mean, what does it? Here's the thing: I look at this, and I know it's very easy to go back in a draft and say, well, this guy was good, that guy was good, they should have taken that player. But the Kahali Waring draft pick never made any sense to begin with. Because, and I don't know if that's a Brian Gain problem, I don't know if that's a Bill O'Brien problem, combination thereof, but they had just taken Akins and Thomas the year before. The only way the Texans, and I know, spring 2019 feels like it was basically 15 years ago at this point, but at that spot, if you're taking a tight end, if you're the Texans, that guy better be an ass kicker. That guy better be someone who you think, man, I can't believe this guy is here. He's going to be a star. I'm amazed this guy's dropped this spot. And Kahali Waring clearly was not that kind of prospect. That was a luxury pick for a team that I don't think had the ability to make a luxury pick. And now you look back, and you mentioned Ferguson, who went one pick earlier than Waring. Damian Harris, who you mentioned, went one pick later. He'd be nice to have. Bobby Okereke, who the Colts have, who looks like he's a pretty good coverage linebacker. I don't know if Connor McGovern's any good. Jamel Dean for the Bucks. I don't know how good he is, but I watched him play, and he's always mentioned. So I'd rather have him than Kahali Waring. It was a really, really puzzling draft pick, and it continues to be that way a year and a half later.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know. Hopefully he won't be remembered as Ryan Griffin putting his hand through the window at the Marriott rather than the pick. But it seems that way at the minute, and it did seem an odd one. But I often go back, and I think why people are infatuated by him is the reports from the joint practices at Green Bay, were glowing, and then he just got it. I think he got a concussion and he missed time. And he's, and then he was on IR. And then, but what I thought was strange, when he went on IR again this year, nobody really clarified what was wrong with him.
Yeah, it's almost like they're hiding whatever the injury might be because they don't want to admit that he's not very good. I honestly can't figure it out. He's in the category of players, I just want him forced on the field and just to see what he looks like. And if he's bad, then at least I want to see it with my own eyes, because then it makes it easier for me to accept it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, if he was that bad, why not just cut him, and cut your losses, in year two, if he just wasn't up to, you go through training camp, albeit limited this year. It's, and just say, look,
there's probably no purpose for them in cutting him now. There's probably much more value in them keeping him, especially with this kind of season, and then activating him at some point like they have within the past week. And then he gets some playing time, and who knows, maybe he shows you something and you feel better about him moving forward.
Yeah, and I think I got another guy who was a mid-round pick. Kiki comes back in, and I was at the game in Indianapolis when I saw him make his first start.
Yep.
And I've never seen a player in any time for the Texans come in, particularly in offense, at a skill position, and just make an instant impact. And it was end arounds, it was motions in the backfield, which he did, on Sunday. And I don't know if that's his specific role and nobody else performed. I know Cobb does a bit of that, but it seems like he's consistently on the move to try and get the linebackers to shift. It was good to see him come back in, I thought, Mike, because it feels like there's a lot of untapped potential there, and it's just been a mix of O'Brien emotion and coaching that's been and injury that's not got him to realise his potential.
Yeah, you hit on it. Whenever Bill O'Brien put a player in the doghouse or had an issue with a player because of personality issues, I always sided with the player over O'Brien. I just think that I think whatever O'Brien is looking for in a football player, I think is wrong. I mean, I'll just say I think Bill O'Brien's evaluation of football players on their traits is incorrect. That's the simplest way I can put it. And Kiki's a good example of that. And while I'm sure, in a weird way, like I wonder if Randall Cobb's actions and comments in the media kind of helped push O'Brien out the door a month and a half ago. I'm just kind of speculating here. And I think some of his comments have been sort of interesting to the media. The signing really made no sense to me, particularly the contract that he got. And then you put Kiki on the field on Sunday after the Cobb injury, and he looks pretty decent out there. And and he's out there, returning punts as well. And it's another example of sometimes you need to cut your losses with this dead weight at the front of the roster, whether it's DeAndre Carter. I don't like the Cobb contract whatsoever, and just see what you have in Kiki. I understand he can drive you nuts with some of his big mistakes. The fumble against Denver last year, like that completely changed the course of that game, even though they were down, 35-3 at halftime. That fumble was just a massive play. I get why that would make a coach angry, but I just think he's a talented player. And the weirdest part to me about it is that Kiki can go from like being inactive for weeks at a time to being active for a game like Sundays against the Patriots. And then he gets in the game and it's like he's lining up here, he's lining up there, he's in the pre-snap motion. I'm like, how is this guy just inactive for long stretches? And yet when he's in there, he seems to be a critical part of what you guys are doing. It's really, really strange to me.
He's obviously an NFL caliber player. And I think when you touch on the DeAndre Carter release, I don't think the mistakes, I think like you're saying about O'Brien evaluated, I think the person was valued more than their footballing ability. And I think when you compare that like for like to DeAndre Carter, the mistakes that Carter made, all the fumbles last year, he started off this year, they, at worst they were on a par with Kiki's mistakes. And he was given chance after chance after chance to do nothing and basically sit back there and let the ball bounce from the 5-yard line, which he did for most of the season before he was cut. And then Kiki comes in and he makes an impact. Now, I think Deshaun forced his balls into him at times, and he did that on a third down play. And that was one of the ones I mentioned earlier about Fuller was away. He'd gone up the sideline and beat the guy off the line, and there was no safety deep to help out. So, I think he does, and he forced another one into a deep ball into the end zone. Kiki was calling for a flag, and that was one of the two field goal plays, or the failed third down that made us go for a field goal. But he comes in and contributes straight away, and it just makes you think, as you said, if he just had been given a fair chance, are you saddled with that Randall Cobb contract? Now, I don't think that's our biggest problem, but it's certainly maybe top 10 as we look, as the next regime look to rebuild the roster. But it feels like, again, just more small bits of mismanagement all kind of creeping into one bigger picture.
Yeah, it's another example, as you mentioned, the way the roster has been mismanaged. It's probably not the worst thing in the world. I suppose that they have other much bigger issues with their contracts, but I am curious to find out over these next, right now the Texans are 3-7, so 6 games to go. What we see from Kiki moving forward, if he can look like the player who had those 2 big games against Indianapolis back in 2018, if we see more of that there, because that would change some things as far as how I'm looking at things for 2021. He's going to have some opportunities here starting on Thursday against the Lions, because it seems like this Cobb injury, it might be a significant toe injury. He's getting a second opinion. Who knows if we even see him for the rest of the season. So Kiki might just be the slot guy for the rest of 2020.
Yeah. I think I actually talked about this last week with Brandon as well, but I felt like you could have said to Kiki and Stills, you guys are going to be our 2 slot. We're going to rotate you in and out, and that contract was not necessary, and that 12 million a year could have badly gone to a defense. But I think Cobb has been okay, and he's made his plays. I think he gives them that sort of nous over the top or across the middle when to sit down in the zone and just take his easy completion. I think that's the issue Kiki does. But every time I think about it, not to labour this point too much, but on a fourth string receiver, but I remember when he was out with a hamstring injury in his rookie year, and O'Brien, who he never handed out compliments unnecessarily, and he said a player like a great or a good player like that should not be missing this length of time. We can't have that happen again. So he basically outwardly admitted that it was a big loss to that offense. Now, I know there was probably many excuses he peddled to Cal and whoever about how his offense wasn't productive enough in 2018. However, at that point he was valued, so the talent's obviously there, and you hope you get to see a good chunk of them for the remainder. So the next coaching staff definitely at least want to give him a fighting chance to make a roster spot next year.
I don't really have a ton to add to that. I'm just curious again how Kiki is going to play the rest of the way, and he's not an outside receiver, so the Texans have some decisions to make as far as Fuller's contract, Brandon Cooks, and his money, so it doesn't impact that per se. But it would be nice if Kiki has, a big game or two and plays well for a stretch here, because this team, again, considering the cap situation and the draft pick situation, they need all the cheap young help they can get.
And you think we've got a chance potentially to see Coulter as well? I think because Stills, well, I've had a theory all season, Mike, that I don't know and if this is necessarily fair or not, but
I love theories.
But do you not think Kenny Stills' head is just not in it this year?
I have no idea what's going on. Like, I know he said he considered opting out pretty strongly and opted against it maybe towards the end. It's a fair theory. It is bizarre that a guy who's always been fairly productive, who came in last season very late with not a lot of time and immediately made an impact and had, I think, a fairly decent season, made some big plays, has been just completely MIA for them. And, they like running empty sets and having a bunch of receivers, and yet he's really been just not much of a factor whatsoever for them.
Yeah, I just go back to the offseason and look, and I totally respect his work, in terms of equality and going out. Yeah. But, from that arrest to that emotional press conference he gave, which was great, by the way, but I think there's two very different kind of headspaces you need to be in. One that needs to learn a pro, system playbook. And you know what? I don't even think it's his knowledge of the playbook, and I think it's maybe just his application, his desire, and maybe he thinks there's bigger issues out there. He's at a point in his career where he's made money, and he probably doesn't need to play another season after this one. And I would think he would get signed by another team, because he certainly won't be in Houston. But it feels like, again, just wasted talent, because if you can come in week one that not even had a week's worth of conditioning with a new team, come over from a trading catch up a potential touchdown that should have won a game in week one last year and made a lot of big plays for this team at big points. It feels like, again, we've just got guys taking up space when you could really be getting something out of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at the cap table right now, and Kenny Stills his cap hits $7 million. And I know that it's essentially for this year, a 1-year deal that they could have cut him if they wanted to, or actually they couldn't have, I think, because of the dead cap. But they're just in a spot where, if you look in hindsight, like, you would have rather spent that $7 million almost anywhere else. Defensive back, safety, another edge guy. He's not, for this season, giving you near the bang for the buck.
Yeah, we've just talked about the best part, $20 million here on the offense. It isn't really doing a huge amount. That could have easily been replaced. So I think it probably sends, gives a good, microcosm into the roster composition that we're facing. But I think despite all that, I think we touched on it earlier, but I don't think it probably did it enough justice. I thought the ball placement and the way in which he was dropping the passes over linebackers' heads, he was faking guys out in terms of zone coverage, and then just dropping the ball. I thought that was Deshaun's. It was great to watch, and I think the second half wasn't so bad. I think there was both those drives. They were 4th and 3rd and 4th and 2nd. I think
Yep.
4th and 2 rather. That they probably would have gone for if they were chasing the game.
Good point.
And I thought as well. I don't know what you thought about the tripping call from Kyle Duggar on Jordan Aikens, but that was the most blatant trip I think the refs could have. They missed really. They missed a lot of calls, I thought, on Sunday.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's a play that we kind of forget about, and CBS did a horrible job of not showing that in slow motion afterwards, but it looked like that was definitely a trip in that situation. And I just thought the bigger picture of the game is that we know what the issues of the team are, and we spent a lot of time talking about it. Jack Easterby, what they did with O'Brien, the lack of draft picks, the lack of cap space. But I have to imagine, if you're somebody who wants to be a head coach in the NFL watching that game, then the opportunity to coach Deshaun Watson is one that is not one that comes around often. Now, this is a weird year for head coaching candidates in that there are some really appealing spots. If the Chargers fire Anthony Lynn, Justin Herbert has had, I think, an excellent rookie season. So that's someone you want to coach as well. And he, unlike Deshaun, is going to be on that rookie contract. Other guys will have the ability to coach Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields, some of those guys. But those players are not as much known quantities. I know Deshaun will be operating on his second contract and will be compensated what he's worth. But I just think that's the bigger picture of the game on Sunday, that you can win with this player because of how special he is. And even by himself, with the litany of issues the organization has, he makes this Texans job a good one because of who he is and how good he is.
The way in which he's just sprayed the ball around was just, I thought that was, I was trying to think, when do you think that was the last time he played that well and just looked like he was on every throw, was almost on the money? I couldn't quite think.
Yeah, I got to think about the games this year because I think Deshaun has had. It's weird that we went so long looking for a franchise quarterback. Now they have one, and they're 3-7. I think about. I think he was really. I thought. Let me see here. I thought in the Tennessee game, the overtime loss, I think Deshaun was really, really good that day, and they obviously lost that game because of their defense and not their offense. He didn't get the ball back after the failed 2-point conversion, right? They went down the field, scored 2 points, got the ball, and then scored again. 4 touchdowns, no picks. So I think he's played at this level, maybe not quite as sharply as he was in this game. I also thought the first half against Pittsburgh, he was excellent.
Yeah, the first half against Pittsburgh was great. And I think that's probably the loss, that if you see them sitting, what are they, 9-0 now? 10-0. 10-0. That's probably the one that we've been closest to, apart from the Tennessee game. But you expect a close game when it's in your division. But yeah, I think he looked like the player that everybody thought he could be. And I think everybody's talked about Mahomes, and him and Mahomes will always be compared. But it felt like on Sunday he flashed enough. If you're a head coach, I remember Thomas Dimitrov talking about that, and he says, until you find a franchise quarterback, it's a search that will consume you until you do. And it's basically, if you think of all the hours and time spent every draft and having to do that, when you take that out of it and you have that leg up and that initial starting point for anybody, you think if you're going to be a first-time GM or a second-time GM or a first-time head coach, or you're going to, or the new GM is going to go out and try and sell the Texans to anybody, I think you just put on the tape of the first half, and not that I think many would need to, but I think people would just love I think because everybody it's an environment that's full of sort of alpha guys that think they can do it their own way, and I think you never underestimate when you see some of these signings, and it was probably the arrogance of the coaching staff of what we can do to coach these guys up. And I think anybody who's at this level of coaching in the profession, I think you'd be hard pressed. Apart from Mahomes, I don't think there's any other quarterbacks that people would rather work with. Yeah,
and you think about what we thought of Deshaun's situation relative to Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, and now, as you continue to kind of go through it, Mahomes is in his own stratosphere, obviously. But, right now, I think if you ask people, would they take Deshaun Watson or Lamar Jackson? Right now, I think most people are taking Deshaun. And I think it was interesting what Belichick told the guys on the pregame show on the Sports Hub in Boston before Sunday's game, Belichick talked about how, quote, I think Watson is really a complete quarterback, and they run very much of a traditional professional NFL passing game. A lot of RPOs, some moving pocket plays. Watson has the ability to make all the throws, handle the passing game from empty to 3x1, 2x2 sets, intermediate, deep, and quick throws and moving pocket plays. So this is a very difficult offense to defend, and I would say Watson has shown the ability as a quarterback to be as versatile, really, as anybody we've faced. Now, I know that Belichick usually compliments people before he plays them, but I think there's a level of detail there that I think it's true. I think the analysis is correct in that Deshaun is starting to become a more complete quarterback. And you mentioned being able to pass the ball and distribute it to different players. I mean, I'm looking at the receiving chart, and it's, Fuller gets his share of targets, Cooks, Akins, and then a little bit here with Fells and Brown. I'd still like to see more of Duke Johnson. And keep in mind that Deshaun is doing this with the worst running game in the NFL, and the only part of the running game that's any good is him.
I saw. I think he was 88% or above of almost 90% of all yards was either from his arm or his legs, and that I think Tim Kelly probably deserves some credit in the sense that our running game for the remainder of the season, because I don't think you can fix it. Correct me if you think otherwise, Mike, but I don't think you can fix it in season. I've taken a snapshot of all the run plays, bar the three on the final drive where they're just trying to kill time before they punt. But I think I don't think you can fix it. So I think that there's an acknowledgement of short dump off passes, screen passes is our running game for here on out, because I think we've just got a distinct lack of coaching on the offensive line, and we're just not moving the pile. I think from my initial look today, and I'm going to try and write an article on this week. How can we fix the run game, or what are the issues in the run game? Just taking those plays from Sunday, because when you're passing can you pass to set up the run, and you think when your quarterback is passing it that well, that should allow you at least to run the ball a bit. But even despite that, they just could not run it at all. Again, for now, the 10th game in a row.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm at a point now, and this last game was really the breaking point for me. I don't think it's on the players anymore, the running game. For me, it's on the coaches. And because for the running game to be this bad, where basically having a 3-yard run is like a good play, to me, that's on the coaches. Now, if you want to tell me that they need to upgrade the interior of the offensive line and the running backs aren't good enough, that's fine. But there's no excuse for the running game to be this putrid. And at this point, I am saying that most of it is the scheme and actually not the talent. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I just can't for the life of me work out why you could run it last year, regardless of the running back. Because
I know.
And you think, because if you see how many, think of Le'Veon Bell, think of in Pittsburgh, and then he's never reached anywhere near the same heights. And I always think your running game is a byproduct of your talent up front and your scheme. And I think arguably we've got the talent, but they're coached terribly, so that talent is equalized to a degree. And the scheme is the biggest equalizer, because I just don't think we know what our proficiencies are. But I thought it was interesting, Mike, when you saw Duke Johnson in the press conference. I think it wasn't this week, but the week prior, and he said, I think we can run outside zone. The rest of it we struggle with, was effectively what he said.
Yeah.
And when one of your players comes out and says that, I find there's obviously a disconnect there between the type of run plays that they're calling versus the type of run plays that the players think they can run.
Yep. I mean, I just think that the running game is broken. At this point, I honestly don't care if you have 5 minimum salary guys playing on your offensive line and 3 minimum salary running backs. There's no excuse for a running game to be this bad. I mean, it can't be this hard to gain 3 to 5 yards in the NFL. I just refuse to accept that.
And I think probably the biggest underlying takeaway I think you could take from Sunday was, and I know it was part of the New England scheme, and by just on a side note, is there a worse haircut in the NFL, maybe the Oakland owner, than Belichick Jr.?
Yeah, yeah. It is kind of weird that he's letting him run that defense, which is not. I know in the advanced stats it has not been pretty for them.
Yeah, odd one. I think is he's obviously sees it as a lost season, doesn't he? So he's obviously just. I think he's given him the chance to hopefully maybe go and get a job elsewhere. Maybe that's the case. He won't be there next year. But I know they only rushed 3-4 like we talked about. But I think on a day where the pass protection was looked by far its best was a day that Laramie Tunsil wasn't playing.
Yeah, I do think that they got lucky in their opponent because the Patriots, to me, I don't know if the numbers back this up, but I think they have the worst pass rush in the NFL. I mean, they don't have guys who I know Winovich had a nice game against the Ravens, but right now they can't rush the passer. I mean, against the Jets, they couldn't rush the passer at all. They were not getting close to Flacco. The Ravens game was weird. It was played in bad weather. They don't have any juice right now rushing the passer. So I felt if the Texans were going to play a game that they didn't have Laramie Tunsil, this was the game.
It reminded me, I don't know if you remember the London game last year, but that was a game that Tunsil missed as well, didn't make the
Right.
trip. And that was probably one of their better offensive performances as well. And I was watching some tape the other week, and, if you remember Deshaun's rookie year when you had Giacomini and Chris Clark out there, and I was, and then you see all the injuries that the Chiefs have had on their offensive line as well, and it doesn't matter because the ball comes out quick or the scheme allows the layup offensive plays that mean the quarterback's not holding on to it for a length of time, that pass protection becomes overemphasized. And I don't know. I think look, the trade for Tunsil's it's been done to death, but it feels like sometimes when your quarterback's that good, and if your scheme was just 5-10% better,
Yep.
you didn't need to make that investment. And I obviously your reflections of it will change over time, but that reflection or that sentiment certainly seems to become more reoccurring, I think, over time when we're starting to see that one play out.
Yeah, I mean, and it's another example of when you give one person way too much power and there's not a clear plan for the organization to land a left tackle, then they end up overpaying for one and giving him a ton of money. It's nothing against Tunsil at all. I think he's a genuinely very good to excellent player, and he's I know he's had a few injury issues, but he's mostly stayed healthy here. I know he had the flu on Sunday. I think he'll be back for this game against the Lions, but they would be better off with a mediocre investments probably and an average left tackle to be able to redistribute those assets into getting defensive players or something else as opposed to what they gave up to get Laramie Tunsil. I think he's an excellent player, but it's just that when you give up so much to get that player, it's going to hurt you with the rest of the roster.
Yeah, because I think that, well, certainly my sort of reflection, and the league changes, it's continually changing every year, but I think on defense, and we've certainly seen it from a Texans viewpoint, that the defense is about stacking as many talented players as you can, because on an offense you can look at the Saints. They've got one good receiver, the rest guys are it's probably your average fan struggle to name the rest of the skill positions, bar Kamara. And then but you can't have a successful defense if you've only got one good pass rusher. The Texans have shown that this year. So it's about stacking talent, and hence why I'm almost against, the more I think about it now, is actually having a defensive head coach, because actually if you look at Salah, you and I could get good sack production out of that line when healthy in San Francisco, because it was talent upon talent, and I think we've seen that. So I think it wasn't what we needed, I think is probably, if we were going to take the next step. But look, I think overall great performance, a good win, a good to get that sort of positivity and that display of what is on the roster. Final quick note: PJ Hall, do you bring him back? Torpek out for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I'd like to bring him back at a cheap number if I can get him. He's obviously not a solution to stopping the run, but I think he's shown enough flashes to where he intrigues me. I actually did a bunch of his games at Sam Houston State, and he was obviously a super talented player at that level. Yes, that was one of their very few good moves of the offseason, and I'd look to bring him back.
Yeah, I think he's flashed enough to suggest that if you can get him on a vet minimum to 1.5 a year, then I think that'll be That'll be right. Detroit on Thursday, Thanksgiving. Two teams that are kind of in a similar position where they've got good quarterbacks, but necessarily not the roster. Detroit look banged up at the minute. I think they're maybe in a position that they'll be looking for a new head coach. I think
Yep.
Patricia's not made many friends there, nor has the inherited owner. So they're kind of similar teams in terms of their sort of on and off field outlook. You think the Texans can go there and make a performance? I know they were there 4 years ago with the Justin Forsett touchdown. They got a free one from the refs there, but you think it's you think considering they've just been shut out by Carolina and an XFL quarterback that we could go and build on Sunday.
Yeah, I actually expect the Texans to win this game, which I know is a dangerous place to be with a 3-7 team. The Lions didn't score against the Panthers. I'm sure they'll score in this game because I don't expect the Texans defense to back it up that quickly on the road with a short turnaround. But I just think that the Texans will be able to score points against the Lions with Deshaun playing at this level. They'll have Tunsil back. Injury-wise, they don't have a ton of huge concerns for this game. And I actually expect them to go in there and be able to win against the Lions.
Yeah, interesting that we're going to be, I think DeAndre Swift's still out, so I think we'll be Adrian Peterson predominantly running their attack, which you didn't think you'd say that in 2020. But I think it's a matchup that favours Houston because we can outgun them on offense if we continue to play the levels we did on Sunday. And there should be enough firepower in there to just, to go on the road and put a good performance on. I think Deshaun as well. And I think this is probably inherent in a lot of young players now. I think when they're on the stage, I think because they're more entrenched in social media than previous generations, I think they seem to have a way of finding a gear when they know everyone's watching.
Yeah, and while the matchup is not that appetizing for the national audience, I think if Deshaun plays close to the way that he did on Sunday against the Patriots, I think people would enjoy watching that performance a lot on Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And Mike, any Thanksgiving traditions that you've got? Or are you always working?
No, this year I'm not going back home for Thanksgiving for like the second time in the last 10 years just with COVID, and I'm just nervous about traveling. So it'll just be, me and a friend basically. So that's really about it. I'm really just about like eating and watching as much football as possible.
Any food favorites? I'm going to attempt to do a Thanksgiving dinner this year, so I'm open to suggestions.
I'm not a great cook to say the least, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask. I would say my favorite Thanksgiving side is usually stuffing.
Stuffing, right? Okay,
yes.
Okay. I've been trying to poll as many people this week to see if I can get it right. So we'll see what we can do. I think
you do a better job than I would. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, not being able to travel the games for the first time in about 7 years has not been it's been quite strange actually watching it from the outside, not being able to go and see it live. So
yes.
I think Detroit will have some fans in there, but I don't think it's necessarily one of those. I think to be fairness, I think Ford Field is one of those stadiums, original franchise team, big tradition on Thanksgiving, and I think the crowd does make a bit of noise. So I think taking that out of it as well probably only help Houston.
Yeah, I think so too. Plus, playing in an indoor environment, I think also is helpful for the way this team plays. I think you saw against the Browns, like the Texans, the way they're built right now, with the complete inability to run the football or stop the run. You want to have it basically be as neutral of an environment as possible.
Yeah, because it almost feels like, I think Belichick said that at the start of the year, didn't he? He said, "What did the game with no fans remind you of?" And he simply said, "Practice." So I think,
exactly.
I think that helps. So yeah, I'm with you, Mike. I fully expect to go and hopefully win the second game in a row for what feels like a really long time. Just before we wrap up, I know we touched on it. Do you have any preference for head coach or GM?
Do I have any preference for head coach or GM? Well, honestly, for a GM, not really. The ones that I've seen floated out there all have pretty decent resumes to me. Head coaching wise, the guys, I'd be okay with Eric Bieniemy. I would just need to know more about what his philosophy would be as a head coach. I want to know more information about what his exact role is in Kansas City. Two guys who I would absolutely interview for this job for head coach would be Joe Brady, the OC of the Panthers, and the defensive coordinator of the Colts, Matt Eberflus. Those are two guys I would really like to interview because their resumes interest me a lot.
Yeah, I think the Bieniemy one is what was the biggest inhibitor of all. I think he's been for 8 in that region anyway, head coach interviews, and not got the job. I'd love to know or ask, not that they'd probably tell anybody in Houston, but what was the reason they didn't give him the job? Because it feels like he's just been overlooked too many times. But then again, I think there's something appealing about that he could make it happen. It seems like he's Deshaun's choice. He's certainly the popular, outside looking in choice. But yeah, I think that's the issue, isn't it? Is it just Andy? Is he just a byproduct of Andy Reid, or is he a supporting factor to Andy Reid?
Yeah.
I think that's the question that nobody, unless you're sitting in that interview, will probably be able to answer. And truthfully, can he answer that himself? And maybe that's why he hasn't got one of these.
I mean that's the hard part because I just you're asked for your opinions on head coaching candidates, and honestly, it's just I know it's almost a cop out, but it's like I don't know because a lot of the candidates have never been head coaches. Now, if Jim Harbaugh has interest in going back to the NFL, he's been an NFL head coach, and you can look at his resume and think accordingly. But like what I know about Joe Brady is it is unquestionable that Joe Brady is one of the best young offensive minds in football. The resume speaks for itself, what he did at LSU in 2019 and the Panthers' competitiveness with Teddy Bridgewater this season. But Joe Brady at 32 years old being a head coach, I don't know what that looks like. Matt Eberflus was somebody who the Cowboys were very unhappy to lose to Indianapolis. Matt Eberflus has done an awesome job with that defense. How Eberflus is going to do as a head coach, I have no idea. All I can do is just look at the resume, what they've actually done, and then just kind of project from there.
Yeah, it's so tough, isn't it? I think particularly with the GM search as well. I mean, how do you piece together the GM, which they're going to say first, and then I think that then has a trickle-down effect on which, as you said, they may already have a good idea of who they want that to be, number one, and maybe a number two, plan B, if you like. But to know how closely they're linked and then who they'll pick from that, I think very few of us will know until it actually gets announced in January or maybe February. But certainly there's games to be played, and hopefully we can get another victory on Thursday on the Thanksgiving slate, the first of 3 games on Thursday. Mike, thank you very much for your time, and thanks for joining us again.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.